This week in CIST 1602, Chapter 9, we're going to look at security management practices. So once we get through this chapter, you should be able to list the elements of key information security management practices, discuss and implement information security constraints on general hiring practices. We'll explain the role of information security in employee terminations. Look at how security practices are used to regulate employee behavior and prevent misuse of various types of benchmarking and their use in security planning. So Chapter 9 introduces the skills and job positions commonly available in organizations that relate to information security. After that, you're going to learn about the different certifications available for verifying an individual's capabilities. You also look at the issue related to employee terminations are going to be discussed, as well as security precautions for controlling employee behavior. Finally, you're introduced to information security management practices involving benchmarking and baselining. So we'll start off talking about security employment practices. Now, from an information security perspective, there are a lot of security pitfalls when hiring a new employee. So in this, the person responsible, the main person responsible for the information security, usually the CISO, they need to establish the dialogue with HR personnel so that the security considerations are taken into account for the positions as part of the hiring process. So when you integrate InfoSec in the hiring process, you need to make sure that you review and update job descriptions. That's also going to include any of the InfoSec responsibilities and also screen for unwanted behavior or unwanted disclosures. All right, so when an organization undertakes an InfoSec-driven review of the job description, and you can think about which job descriptions must be reviewed in that case, which IT jobs are not directly associated with information security should be reviewed. Really, everything, every job should be reviewed periodically, regardless of whether they're directly with IT or not. When an organization is going when you are doing the interviews, information security should also advise the human resources to limit information provided to the candidates about those access rights. Also, if you're giving a tour, an on-site interview, you want to make sure that you are not taking them into secure areas, are not giving them access to where they can observe secure functions. Also, make sure you don't give the candidates unrestricted access to secure areas. It's a security risk because those individuals could observe enough information about the operations or the InfoSec functions to where they become a potential threat to the organization. A background check should also be used, should be conducted for each candidate before they are offered any of the jobs. You see some common types of background checks that are ran: previous employment verification, references, identity, motor vehicle records, drug history, credit history, and then the criminal or civil court history. Now, once a candidate's accepted the job, the employment contract becomes an important security instrument This is something where job candidates can be offered the employment that's contingent upon the agreement, where they're not really offered the job. They can't accept the job unless they agree to the organization's policies. A new employee should receive a copy of the policy or a briefing on the policy. They should receive the training on the policy. They should be able to have to sign that they have received the policy and that they are aware of the policy as part of their employment conditions. Also, if you want to heighten information security awareness, you should incorporate information security components into the employee performance evaluations. Okay, because employees pay close attention to these job performance evaluations. So in there, if you have the information security task, that's going to motivate your employees to take more care when they are performing these tasks. Now, there are some issues that arise with termination when an employee leaves the organization. A couple tasks that must be performed is the employee's access to the organization's systems must be disabled. The employee must return all removable media. The hard drives must be secured. File cabinets locks must be changed. Office doors locks must be changed. Key card access must be revoked. The former employee's personal effects must be removed from the premises. The former employee should be escorted from the premises once the keys, key card, and other business property has been turned over. And also, in addition to performing these tasks, there may be an exit interview that will be conducted that's going to remind the employee of any contractual obligations, such as non-disclosure forms, non-disclosure agreements, maybe a no-compete clause. And also they can then obtain feedback from the employee's tenure in the organization. Now, depending on how the employee left, whether it's on hostile or friendly departure, may have an impact on the employee's out processing. A hostile departure, that's when the security cuts off all logical and keycard access before the employee is terminated. The employee may report to work, then it's going to be escorted into the supervisor's office, then escorted to his or her office, cubicle, or their personal area, collect their personal effects under supervision, or they could be informed that their personal property will be boxed up and sent to them. They're asked to surrender all access, keys, key cards, devices, anything that's company property, and then they're going to be escorted out of the building. Friendly departure, this is where the employee may have given notice that they're going to leave at a certain date, usually a 2-week notice. In this case, it does have issues where it makes it more difficult for security to maintain a positive control of the employee's access and information use. Friendly departures, usually the accounts are allowed to continue with the new expiration dates. The employee can come and go at will and collects belongings and leaves without an escort. And in this case, the employee is just asked to drop off the property before departing that belongs to the company. So, regardless of the way a termination happens, anything, the office's information used by the departed employee must be inventoried. Either the files are going to be stored or destroyed and property returned to the organization. Now, a lot of times after the employee's left, only by going through the logs can the misuse of information, information theft, system misuse can be determined, and a breach of policy or loss of information has occurred. And that's what the employees left, and they go through and look for sorting out authorized actions versus unauthorized actions. So we also have various methods that we use to monitor and control employees. That's going to minimize their opportunities to misuse information. One of these ways is separation of duties. It's a way of assigning multiple people to process, to provide checks and balances. And this is done in order to seek the highest security. What it does, it makes it difficult for an individual to violate information security and breach the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of information. Two-man control requires two individuals to review and approve each other's work before the task is considered complete. And that's another way you can use to monitor and control employees and make sure that they're not misusing information. You can also look at job rotation. That requires the employee to be able to perform the work of at least one other employee, and you can rotate those employees to different tasks. Mandatory vacations is another way you can use to discourage employee misuse. What it does, it allows the organization to perform a detailed review of everyone's work while they're on vacation. You can also use the principle of least privilege, which where you will minimize the employee's access. So the employee has access to only information resources they need to perform their duties. This reduces the chance that abusers will damage or steal the data. Some organizations are required by law to protect sensitive or personal employee information, or excuse me, organizations are required by law. This includes personally identifying stuff such as the employee address, phone number, social security, medical concerns, and names and address of family members. This responsibility is also going to extend to customers, patients, and anyone else with the organization that the organization has business relations with. Personal data is no different than other data in information security, as it's expected to be protected, even though more regulations cover its protection. You also have a lot of individuals that are not regular employees. So you do have some security considerations for temporary employees, consultants, and other workers. So any organization that uses temporary workers, contract workers, consultant, business partners, the temporary temps are workers who are hired to fill a temporary position. Contract workers are like electricians, plumbers. They're typically hired to perform a specific service or services for the company. Consultants are usually third-base party firms that are hired to perform a certain task. Business partnerships, they're strategic alliances among organizations, which they exchange information, integrate systems, and enjoy some of each other's mutual advantage. Once again, you want to apply the principle of least privilege here. So access for the temps, for example, should be limited to what is necessary to perform their job. Contract workers should not be left alone to work freely without supervision, and also should not be given full access to the facilities. Same with consultants, they should be handled like contract workers. Business partners, you may have a non-disclosure agreement or a prior business agreement that specifies the level of exposures both the organizations are willing to tolerate. We'll now look at some information security performance measurements. First, we're going to ask what is a performance measure in the context of InfoSec management. These are data points or computed trends that may indicate the effectiveness of security countermeasures or controls, whether it's technical or managerial, that have been implemented in the organization. The types of measures are used for InfoSec measurement programs. You have three types of measures. Those that determine the effectiveness of the execution of the InfoSec policy, those that determine the effectiveness or the efficiency of the delivery of the InfoSec services, and then those that assess the impact of an incident or other security event on the organization or its mission. So those are the types of measures that are used for InfoSec management measurement programs. We also have 4 factors that are critical to the success of an InfoSec performance program. You have to have strong upper level management support, practical InfoSec policies and procedures, quantifiable performance measurements, and the result-oriented measurement analysis. So when we establish performance targets, these make it possible to define success in the security program. A lot of InfoSec performance measurement goals are represented by a 100% target goal. The performance targets, excuse me, are values assigned to a specific metric that indicates acceptable level of performance. This is how we define success in security programs. Are we meeting our performance targets? Keep in mind, though, that simply listing the measurements collected does not always adequately convey their meaning. So the reason why this is the simple list of measurement data is usually insufficient when reporting InfoSec measurements is because to have an effective report, it must also provide the context and the meaning for the values that are being reported as well. Next, we're going to talk about benchmarking. And benchmarking is a thing that can help us determine what controls should be considered. Keep in mind, though, it cannot determine how these controls should be implemented in the organization. So with benchmarking, we compare our own process, practice, and results to an external reference. Now, this can be a recommended or existing practice of a similar organization, or it can be an industry-developed standard. Now, the standard of due care is an organization's adoption of minimum levels of security for legal defense. It may need to show that it's done what is prudent, what any prudent organization would have done in similar circumstances. If we have the failure to support a standard of due care or due diligence, that can open up an organization to legal liability. And that's if it's provided, it can be shown that the organization was negligent in the application of information protection. So due care is saying that this is the minimal level of security that's going to meet the standards that we've done what other organizations would have done in similar situation. Due diligence requires that organizations ensure that the implemented standards continue to provide the required level of protection. So what are the recommended security practices? All right, a recommended security practice are security efforts that are among the best in the industry. There are some ways that you can find recommended practices. One of the sources for finding these practices is look for the Federal Agency Security Project. That's a good source to find recommended practices. Some industries are regulated by laws and standards, and they're subject to government or industry oversight. In this case, they're going to be required to meet regulatory or industry guidelines in their security practices. Other organizations, governments, industry guidelines, they can also serve as an excellent source of information about what's going to be required to control the InfoSec risk. So you have to ask, when you're selecting recommended practices, what criteria should you use? All right, so you should ask, first, does your organization resemble the targeted organization? Are the resources you spend going to be similar to those called for by the practice? And also, are you in a similar threat environment as the one assumed by the practice? Now, one of the biggest barriers to benchmarking in InfoSec is the fact that organizations do not talk to each other. They do not share results. You also have another limitation that no two organizations are identical. And a third limitation is that the recommended Recommended practices are a moving target. The big one is that, if an organization's attacked, if a successful attack is levied against an organization, that organization may often be perceived as a failure, so they try to keep that secret. Baselining is a value or profile of a performance metric against which changes in the performance metric can be usefully compared. It involves making comparisons between two other companies, whereas benchmarking involves making comparison to other companies, where baselining is going to involve making comparison to your own company. You can use this for an individual computer system as well. When you set the computer system up, you can set the baseline. This is what the computer is supposed to do, and nothing else. If the system does something else, it is no longer following along the baseline, and you can say that that system is no longer secure. A definition I had a professor give one time for a secure system is a system that does exactly what it's supposed to do and nothing more. This is the baseline, is when it does exactly what it's supposed to do and nothing more. So there are support for benchmarks and baselines. The Gardner Group, they offer this 12 questions as a self-assessment for recommended security practices when you're discussing people. Do you perform background checks on all your employees with access to sensitive data, areas, or access points? Also, would the average employee recognize a security issue? Would they choose to report it? Would they know how to report it to the right people? Would you look at baselining and benchmarking processes? Are the enterprise security policies updated on at least an annual basis? The employees educated on the changes and consistently enforced? Does your enterprise follow a patch update management and evaluation process to prioritize and mediate the security vulnerabilities? Are the user accounts of former employees immediately removed on termination? Are security group representatives involved in all stages of the project lifecycle for new projects? In technology, they ask, is it every possible route to the internet protected by a properly configured firewall? Is sensitive data on laptops and remote systems encrypted? Are your information assets and the systems they use regularly assessed for security exposures using a vulnerability analysis methodology? And are systems and networks regularly reviewed for malicious software and telltales from a prior attack?